Hold on one second. He's doing it. All right, are we going to call this a quorum? Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tech at State, ElecTech. We had some awesome speakers to kick us off this morning, and I know you're all thrilled for this first panel of the day. We're going to focus on digital strategies for U.S. presidential elections, and we have some incredible folks here to share their thoughts and very recent experiences, some of them on the campaign trail. So I'm going to introduce our awesome moderator, and then he's going to go ahead and introduce the rest of the folks on the panel. Alan Rosenblatt is Associate Director for Online Advocacy at American Progress and Center for American Action Fund. And Alan, we're grateful you could be here for this. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Well, thank you for having us here. I must say up front that you probably will never see such a good panel as you see in front of you in terms of understanding what happened in the election on the digital side. We have. I'm going to give a quick rundown of who's here, but let them talk a little bit more about themselves. At the far end, we have Mindy Finn. Mindy is at Twitter, but with a long history of working with Republican candidates and the Republican National Committee, and is just spectacular at what she does. Next to her is Adam Connor, who is at Facebook doing public policy sector, longtime blogger before that, I think at MyDD. Then next to him is Susan Smith, who is at Google, who I've just met today, and happy that I have. And then next to her is Matt Lira, who has been the Deputy Director for Digital at the Romney campaign, and for many years prior to that was the Director of New Media, or some variation of that title, at Leader Cantor's office, Eric Cantor's office in the Congress. So he's been right at the heart of the use of digital media in Congress as well as in the elections. And Michael Slaby to my right, who was oversaw all of the hard tech side of the Obama campaign in this last election. So these are people who were right smack in the middle of everything, and very few people in the country know anything compared to what these people know with regard to how technology was used in the election. So what I'm going to do is turn this over to, we'll start at Mindy and work our way down and have everybody give a few-minute opening before we go to questions and answers. When we do go to questions and answers, I'll have some questions, but we'll take audience questions and we'll intersperse them as much as possible, and we'll try to get as many questions in as possible. Mindy?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me here. Happy to be here. So one of the first questions that I often get when people are trying to summarize how digital or how the internet impacted the election is what was different in 2012 compared to 2008, 2004, or even the midterm elections, 2010. And this election was really interesting. I mean, coming from Twitter, I think we like to say it was the Twitter election, in that Twitter was barely a blip on the radar in terms of politics in the last presidential election in 2008. And here we were in 2012, and it had an incredible impact on how the race was covered, how the candidates communicated with their voters and constituencies, how voters got information, how people consumed the campaign on television, and really the speed of the race. It certainly sped the race up. But really stepping outside from the Twitter answer, I think what was fascinating about this election is it was hard to put it in a bucket where, some people write it was the data election, but I think it was hard to put it in a bucket that, in 2004 it was about blogs and they really came onto the scene and had an impact. In 2008 it was social. I think this election, new media truly was no longer new, and in order to do digital well, in order to take best advantage of the tools at your disposal, you were using kind of all of them in an integrated way to impact all aspects of the campaign. Those three aspects core aspects being the same as they've been for a long time, which are message, money, and mobilization. I'll be very interested to hear what some on the panel to talk about in terms of how they integrated all of the technologies, how they integrated into social, how they use data. Particularly, I know Michael Slaby is here, and he headed integration for the Obama campaign. And a lot of that is kind of the behind the scenes work that we don't often get to see in the public, that the media, it's hard for the media to cover because they're not seeing it happen. All that being said, I think that there are a lot of things that we can learn from how the campaigns use social in the election, and I'll focus on the Twitter side. For the first time, we saw that it was no longer rapid response. We've become familiar with this term, rapid response, and really campaigns were compelled to do real-time response. This could never be more clear than during the presidential debates, when the campaigns, particularly the presidential campaigns, and this happened in statewide as well, were effectively running their rapid response operations through social, much of it on Twitter, where literally in real time, they were responding to what was happening in the debate, or sometimes pre-butting what was being said in the debate. We've heard a lot about the spin room, and there's this talk of the spin room where post-debate, each of the campaigns each of the campaigns send spokespeople, many spokespeople, to a spin room with all the reporters to start trying to shape the narrative or spin what occurred in their way or push back on statements their candidates made during the debate itself. That spin room, this election was said to be, really just kind of window dressing and no longer has any kind of real impact or effect because the narrative was being cemented in real time on Twitter. You saw candidates giving voters, the press, everyone who's involved in a campaign, really a backstage pass to the campaigns in the ways they haven't before. The press has often gotten that backstage pass as the nature of their job. Voters haven't, and social media really allowed them to have a backstage pass to the campaign. Whether it was photos that the Obama campaign was putting out of the family behind the scenes, or I know the Romney campaign had the body man who traveled with the candidate with a Twitter account who put these behind the scenes photos. You also had the operatives often engaging each other and debating in real time on the platform and making and breaking news on the platform. And a real example was when David Axelrod from the Obama side and Eric Fernandez from the Romney side talked about engaged in a debate on Twitter that they wouldn't have had somewhere else, or certainly wasn't something, it didn't happen on television, it happened on social. And then finally, and I know many on the panel will talk about this more. This really what data has always played a role in campaigns. Our data. The data operations of campaigns have gotten more sophisticated over the years. We've heard a lot about micro-targeting and nano-targeting. That's not something that's new in 2012. That was something that was being done, has been done for decades and has been continually improved. I think the difference is because the technology is more readily available, it's more sophisticated, we're able to do it on a grander scale, and we're able to really go down to individual voters and on specific attributes in a way that you couldn't previously. That was done across the platforms. Social really enabled not only that you gather the data, but a way to communicate with people cheaply, easily, and in real time. And I look forward to talking or hearing more about that from some of the other panelists.
Great, thank you. Adam?
Great. My name is Adam Connor, and I help run Facebook's politics team. I was actually Facebook's first employee here in Washington, D.C., and have been with Facebook for about 5 years. And so I think when people talk about elections and politics and new media, I think we've been able to have a privileged kind of viewpoint of its rise. And I think one of the things that's fascinating to me is, particularly when it comes to presidential cycles, is the idea that much of this is an evolution. Many of these core building blocks of things that we look at today, whether they're video, they're social, other things, they have been around for a while in kind of more raw forms. But whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook, whether it's these things all had building blocks in places like the Dean campaign and the Gore campaign and other things. And you've really just seen them evolve, and being able to use data and analytics now to refine them in a way I think that we haven't been able to do before. I think the 2012 election, for all the attention that's paid to rapid response and other things, is, at least from my side of the aisle, my colleague Katie Handel dealt with the Romney campaign, and I helped advise the Obama campaign, is that Facebook itself was really a place where real people are. It's always been our philosophy. We have a real world, real name kind of mantra. We have more people on Facebook in the United States than actually voted in this election. So people who are eligible to vote, there are more of them on Facebook than actually voted. So this is where people are. This is where voters are. fundamentally, Facebook is a place where organizing can occur in addition to messaging, because that's where people are. And I think the philosophy of the Obama campaign in particular, both in 2008 and 2012, was to refine how to use these tools for organizing. I think one of the fundamental things everyone needs to always understand about a political campaign or an election, as the fundamental goal at the end of the day is to have people take a physical act. People have to go out and they have to vote, whether it's in person or in mail, but there's a physical act. So everything you do is tied to that ultimate goal, whether that's through targeting, whether that's through messengers and things like that. And I think that one of the phrases you will hear thrown around a lot this cycle is the idea of friends and neighbors. You are influenced by the people around you, or the people that you feel most connected with, and that's something we believe very strongly in at Facebook. But I think what's really interesting about that idea is the idea of friends and neighbors. Neighbors, that's a geographic subset around you. That's people who are physically, proximately close to you. But friends, they could be across the street, they could be across the country, they could be across the world, and be the most influential person in your life when it comes to some of these decision making, whether it's going to the movies, picking a restaurant, or picking a presidential candidate. And so a lot of the idea that gets focused on targeting and data is about how do we find the right people to target? How do we find those people that we want to deliver our message to? The flip side, I think what we for the first time are starting to see raw elements of is what is the right messenger to those people once we've identified them? Maybe a television commercial or, isn't the most effective way. Can we use our friends to deliver that message? And we've started to see some real great evidence, both released from the Obama campaign and post-press, but also generally that these people, their friends, are very influential. And I think that moving forward out of this election into future ones, the continued importance of friends, of those conversations that used to take place in backyards or around water coolers will continue to happen online. And that evolution of friends talking to friends and influencing them will only become more powerful as we're able to harness technology to make it more effective.
Great. Thank you very much. Samantha?
Hi, I'm Sam Smith with the Google Politics and Elections team. I've been with Google for almost 2 years. And before that, I worked on the McCain 2008 presidential campaign, which is interesting to see how far we've come in just 4 years and to be on this side of it this time. The Google Politics and Elections team, for those of you that don't know, was formed in 2006 by a couple of engineers that noticed that there was a huge spike in an Australian election for the candidates and their issues. And we realized we weren't serving our users with the best answers. In those 10 blue links, they weren't coming up with the right answers and what they're looking for. So we've kind of worked to make that information available and accessible. So that's part of our mission statement, is to organize the world's information and make it accessible. And so in 2008, we had kind of the YouTube election, as we'll say. We heard Twitter call this the Twitter election. This was really, I think, the data election and Google in terms of all of the products we saw used, from our maps, from our ads, from the search ads. Really was interesting how the campaigns use them. And I'm sure y'all can elaborate on how you guys use them. But as Mindy said, it was real-time response in the ad use. You had someone go on TV, might have made a mistake, and they were able to buy ads off those search terms, because the first place that people look to fact-check candidates tends to be Google and search engines. And we did this really cool thing that we've never done before for elections. We do it for flu trends, is track insights for search, so around key political events. So we really dug into around the conventions and around the debates, what people were searching for on their mobile device or their laptops as they were watching these events. And a lot of times it was, Mitt Romney bio, and that was an opportunity for the Romney campaign to really elaborate and help people find that information about him through search. It was really interesting to see during one of the debates, President Obama said, check the transcript. And we saw a spike, a search and spike for Obama Rose Garden speech about Libya. And it was really interesting to see that voters and users were going online to fact check the candidates in real time. And we were fascinated by these findings, and we built our consumer surveys around them. I don't know if any of y'all have read the Nate Silver article about what the role of data in this election, and how our consumer surveys were kind of able to take the pulse of the electorate, and we predicted accurately the popular vote. And I don't know, I'm not going to say that's right every time. It was an interesting case study for us, because we tend to do experiments and kind of see what works and what doesn't, and that's something that's worked out for us. So it's been really interesting to be on this side of things and see the role of data and how Google has been such an indicator of some of these things and how y'all have used our data. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Thanks, Sam. Matt?
Yes, first I'd like to start off by thanking the State Department for putting this together. I've been in my time in DC kind of as an observer and occasional participant in the programs that they do here and around the world. I'm consistently impressed. So for the State Department folks involved, keep up the great work with that stuff. I'm really proud that you're doing that for our country. As it relates to this panel, so by way of context, let me kind of give you how I kind of fell into the 2012 cycle, and that informed some of the decisions. I decided that I was going to not get involved because, you know, I was happy in the House, and I'm still happy in the House. And then on the Saturday morning, you know, quite surprisingly to me anyway, a representative of our conference was nominated for vice president, and I found myself in Boston within 48 hours. So thus is politics. And one of the things that I've been impressed by when I arrived on the scene was how Zach and the digital team, which I'm proud to be a part of, you know, was able to tackle some of the challenges that were in place given the challenges of the situation. And I'd like to kind of outline some of the challenges of the situation and then some of the successes that I believe inherent in our political culture that the vanquished side won't necessarily get their due credit for. And for the first challenge, and I think it's no accident that the two best campaigns, at least in my brief political life, that in terms of data, were the Bush-Cheney 04 campaign and the Obama 2012 campaign. Because consistently, when it came to areas of data, the number one constraining variable was time. I mean, I joined the campaign along with a lot of other people in August, and in June, when, as my understanding, and Michael will elaborate on this, when they were very smartly already building out some of these platforms and tools, Mitt Romney was still fighting for his political life to secure the nomination. And so I think if there's any lesson for future candidates and campaigns, it's that just as the grassroots infrastructure needs to be built out earlier in the process, so too must the data infrastructure. It can no longer kind of be ramped up at the end and expect to match, you know, particularly against an incumbent. And so that to me is kind of a watershed moment, perhaps not as headline grabbing, but as important as maybe, you know, the sort of online fundraising component was to the Obama 08 campaign. So now kind of shifting to some of the things I thought the campaign did really well. The first is in the manner in which they leveraged the search advertising and advertising, all forms of digital advertising. I think were particularly successful, and in my opinion, also specifically mobile advertising proved to be incredibly effective and received a significant investment from the campaign. To the tune of millions of dollars a day in some cases. I think that those were consistently generating conversions and results in the battleground states. One of the things that Zach and the team were able to put together, which perhaps the Obama campaign did, I'm not aware, but I think it worked, and it worked really well, is just in an integrated data system, at least for the advertising components, so that they were targeting individuals and not audiences or necessarily even geographic regions, but really tying it to target voters or base voters if it's for fundraising. And so all the time I'd hear people say, well, whether Democratic friends or otherwise, I don't see ads, and it's like, well, where do you live? It's like, well, in, we're probably targeting you for ads. And there's a strategic decision there, but in terms of the underlying targeting capability, I thought that worked particularly well. And then I actually believe that we did fairly well on the social front. When you look at the levels of engagement that we were able to secure, Paul Ryan went from 0 to 1 million likes in roughly 89 days. Joe Biden not clocking in at those numbers. So I think that some of our strategies were working there are, I think, to a certain by the candidates themselves, we kind of hit a certain level of a ceiling as the engagement numbers seem to cap out between 1 to 2 million people, or roughly in that ballpark. Where I think one of the areas if I could have added more time for one single project, something that I wanted to do, and we were able to do to a certain degree, it would have been utilizing the Open Graph which I believe, Facebook's Open Graph, which I think the Obama campaign did well. We were kind of racing to throw something together, kind of like, let's throw everything together and kind of put on a show. And it worked. And their statistics worked, from what I've read, and our statistics for that form of engagement also worked, albeit on a smaller scale. So I think that's the future. And I'll hand it over to Michael with my congratulations.
Everybody. I'm Michael Slaby, and I would echo what Matt said. I think it's amazing that the State Department is putting together this really great group of people and an amazing conversation that I'm not sure would have even occurred to anyone in government to start to trying to elicit and have and encourage a few years ago. So this is really fantastic to be here. I think when I think about this cycle versus last, and I played a role in the 08 campaign as well. I started out as the Deputy Director of Digital and then was the CTO back in 08. As we look at the media landscape that we find ourselves in, it's dictated a lot of how we've had to rethink how to structure the campaign, how to structure our teams, how to structure technology. That had a huge impact on the way I built my team, the way we built technology, and the way that we layered engagement and content on top of that. The media, we talk a lot about sort of the fragmentation of the media landscape, and I think we're sort of moving beyond the concept of sort of we started out in the early part of the decade with the end of sort of fixed channels, and we started to see TV in the paid world break down into separate channels, but they were still the paid earned and owned dynamic that we kind of came into the 2000s with sort of fragmented, but those into smaller channels, but those channels didn't integrate. And I think what we see with the advent and the ubiquity of social, people forget, and I think the guys at the beginning of the panel, Mindy and Adam, both sort of touched on, social was just becoming mainstream, really, in 2007, 2008. Twitter was only a year old. There weren't that many people on it. And it was really, I think in 08, the main innovation of the team was the way we embraced and elevated digital, but the electorate wasn't that ready for it, wasn't ready for social in the way that it was this time around. And I think what we see now is these platforms, because of their ubiquity, knitting all of these fragmented channels together into sort of a network of networks. And I think the concept of a channel is a little old now. And what that means is that as digital strategists and as campaign strategists and engagement strategists, we can't rely on controlling the medium in which people consume our messages, the places where people want to engage, or sort of how communities, we are a producer of media in a network of places where everyone else is also producing media. And so the importance of being able to match message and messenger to a target and not just message, like Adam talked about, is incredibly important in this kind of a dynamic. And I think as we think about sort of a unified media landscape, it means a lot of things for what we have to do as organizations and how we have to integrate technology platforms and tools across all of our departments. Campaigns traditionally they're really fast. You don't have enough time. Everything is put together with bubblegum and baling wire, and because of the speed, you're basically organized like disaster response. It's very siloed and very hierarchical, and we know where we're going because the metrics and the outcomes are very clear. It's a binary, you win or lose, and it's going to be dictated by votes one way or the other. And so everybody's going 100 miles an hour, and nobody needs to talk to each other. But that doesn't work in this sort of networked sort of media environment and landscape where communities are interconnected. Departments need to understand each other better, and it meant that I ended up with this crazy Harvard Business Review title of the Chief Integration and Innovation Officer on the campaign. And my role, I oversaw data, technology, analytics, IT, systems, security, sort of all of the hard technical infrastructure underneath, sort of at the bottom layer of the campaign. And one of the most important pieces of what we tried to do was the people that you're engaging, the people that sort of in any sort of public advocacy situation, they don't care about your org chart. They don't, if you're a company, the customer service people need to talk to the marketing people. In the context of a campaign, message people and fundraising and field all need to be speaking to each other, because the people you're talking to at the other end of that channel are voters and volunteers and donors and all of these things, but they are people. They're not. We have a tendency, because we're used to silos and we're used to tools that don't communicate or integrate across departments. Neither do the people, and neither do their experiences. And I think that's the real innovation that we pushed so hard for. And we had I think Matt's point about time is incredibly intelligent and can't be understated. We had a year to build before things really got scary, and that was a gift that we didn't have in 08. We talked about integration in 08, and it was something that we would do manually, and we sort of did with brute force, but we couldn't do it in an elegant way that allowed for a unified experience for the supporters of the campaign. And as we think about what we were able to achieve this time with sort of knitting together people's experience and knitting together the way that people communicate and the way that people engage, integration becomes more and more important for people to have a unified experience in sort of this unified world that I think we live in. I think then we'll leave it. Why don't we get some questions?
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. So one of the things that sort of the big picture of what I'm seeing from what you're saying, what I've been reading, is there's sort of three big buckets of real innovation that occurred in this past campaign. The really maturation of the use of social, at least some call it nano-targeting of ads, and the data integration, which I think is the that most American voters don't truly see, but really key. I want to focus first on sort of what probably is the most fun question or the most popular image, and playing off of what Michael just said about how you can't control all the mediums because there's so much going on. For all of the effort that the campaigns had trying to drive the message on social media, Romney Ryan 2012 and Believe in America were hashtags that the Romney campaign bought during the convention. Frequently and quite overwhelmingly, those campaign-driven messages were often completely buried by the public response. And I'm thinking Invisible Obama, I'm thinking 47%, I'm thinking horses and bayonets, I'm thinking binders full of women. These memes completely derailed, in many ways, at least in the public narrative, what was going on out of the campaigns. So from the campaign's perspectives, how did you manage the chaos? And from the social media team's representatives, how do you see the dynamic of this moving forward?
I think this is a really interesting piece of what was really new this time around, and I think Mindy's point about real-time response and real-time engagement is at the heart of it. And I think you see this, in this sort of, even back in 08. The post-debate and the during debate engagement is about what are the headlines the next morning and what are the sound bites on cable that night. But you're sort of fighting. You have time to have an argument and sort of conversation behind the scenes and in private to try to shape the sort of what congeals into conventional wisdom about the results of something like a debate really, really fast. This time, by the time we were half an hour into the debate, the decisions and the conventional wisdom about who had won was already over. And I actually think the example of this, the pace of this that's really interesting was the Big Bird comment. And there was a new Twitter handle created that was Romney Big Bird. I don't remember the handle. It was Romney Big Bird, I think. There was actually a bunch, but there was one that had like 10,000 followers before the debate ended. And that's not normal. That's not a situation that you can. This is not a situation. You say managed chaos, and I started to chuckle, and it's like you just ride the chaos, right? You are more and more organizations, and even as big as as presidential campaigns are, and we have these massive teams of incredibly smart people, and on both sides, and as sort of big as our operation is, and as sort of intent as we are on trying to shape messaging on social is so much we are a member of a community having a conversation. Now, we are a large member and we have more inertia and we have more followers than and as such can have more influence, but we are at the mercy of a community conversation that we do not control. We can influence it. That influence must be genuine and authentic to be effective. And inauthenticity and a lack of and being disingenuous gets called out really, really quickly. And it means that I think this is where we get a little lost in sort of the technology conversation and lose sight of the fact that in this place where you have less control, the clarity of your values matters more. You can't get away with, and both, I think both campaigns, there were probably moments where we both got in trouble for wanting to be vague. And people sort of just not demanding that would be okay. And being in a position where if you're not going to control exactly the channel in which things are consumed, and you're not going to necessarily control who's sharing what, if you're not clear about what you're about, your message is going to get lost. And the concept of message control has a whole new meaning now than it ever did, even 4 years ago, when that was mostly about getting your own team on the same page. And that's hard enough in a huge campaign with state operations and all these other things, which is another interesting piece of this, which is how you sort of translate a coherent, unified set of sense of self as an organization into a 50-state strategy on both sides.
So where Michael and his team were kind of riding these massive waves, in many cases, Matt, your team was getting hit by them.
Well, I mean, the election is as it goes, but we had strong moments as well. I think that the Denver debate among them and other sites, but he's absolutely right about the nature of sort of the chaos or the storms when it comes to social, particularly on debate nights, because there's massive focus of the American people. And I actually think it's a relatively healthy thing that that the control is being kind of radically, in some ways, shifted out of the control of the spin room, as Mindy said, and into the hands of the public. I mean, I think, the first night, or the Denver debate, obviously went well for our campaign. And, the Obama campaign didn't even field, I think, just one respondent into the spin room, because it's, in a smart way, a recognition that this day is kind of what it is. Let's move to the next day. And, and similarly, there were issues where once a meme or whatever is created in a genuine way, you're not going to undo that with, putting words that work together or something like you would have 20 years ago. It takes, a real, and I like what you said about authenticity and genuine and clarity of argument and position. And I actually think the voters, in some ways, that resonates with them. I know that it did in previous elections, at the congressional level or whatever. Like, agree or disagree, the argument's very clear. And I think that also was at play in 2012. So but for the debate night specifically, as it relates to the Twitter phenomenon, if you look at the debate pages, so sort of the forward-facing strategies of the two campaigns, developed totally separated from each other, obviously, because it's not like we're communicating. They were remarkably similar. I mean, they were Twitter-focused, because obviously it's a live televised event, and that's where the conversation is going to take place. They're trying to push out, rather than kind of be a stream of public comments, it's the comments from the campaign that we're trying to get out into the stream. And there's a lot of little comparisons. And what I found remarkable about that, and there's differences in execution at various levels, but the strategy itself developed totally in isolation and probably in relatively the same time frame, was remarkably the same. And I think that it predicts into the future an increasingly large role for Twitter, not just as an observer, or I shouldn't just say Twitter, but for the broader social conversation around the debates, and hopefully one day within the debates. So,
I mean, I think the hope and promise of the internet is that it puts the power into the hands of the people, or returns the power back to the people. And as the internet, as people consume the information online and connect to politics through the internet increasingly, the idea, and I think what you're talking about in this election, is more the power goes to the people. I think another way to put that is that historically, marketing has been about creating conversations. And today, we're at a point where marketing has to be about leveraging the conversations that are already happening. And I think when the campaigns did that, they had a lot of success. When they tried to, I think Michael made this point, when they kind of thought they could be vague and communicate in platitudes or just push message, it wasn't necessarily successful. But if they could tie into what people are already talking about, and on Twitter, it's always very clear, you can see what's trending. So whether it was Big Bird, or whether it was Solyndra earlier in the year, or whether it was 47%, a campaign, or really any entity, looks tone deaf if they're talking about a subject that is completely separate. But if they, and which is why you can't, I mean, it does have to be a real-time strategy. It does put the onus on the campaigns to be real time, because if they decide, which they have historically, today is going to be the day we talk about immigration, and next week's going to be the day we talk about the economy, they can tend to look tone deaf. They have to have room to respond and participate in the conversation that's happening. And I think the campaigns both campaigns, there are examples of them doing that well. There's times where, the chaos of a campaign, maybe they didn't do as good of a job. I think, as Matt said during the first debate, both campaigns, I should mention, on Twitter, not only we're using Twitter extensively in terms of the principal account, so the candidates Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, but they also had accounts that were just focused on rapid response. They had accounts in states. Paul Ryan obviously had his own account. The spouses, Michelle Obama and Ann Romney, that all of them used for their own unique purposes. But during that first debate, as Matt campaign was very strong at not only responding to what was happening in real time and running their rapid response on Twitter, but also advertising many spokespeople on the campaign, or something you wouldn't have seen prior in a previous cycle, where the actual tweet from the candidate said, follow, obviously he was going to be participating in the debate, follow my team tonight who will be tweeting this in real time. And it wasn't an official handle, rapid response, Romney rapid response, but it was actual people who were working on the campaign, about 20 people. The Obama campaign and later debates was very good at getting into the horses and bayonets moment, which is something that trended immediately, and not only including it in their content, but actually bidding on that key that you can do in Google on Twitter, so that all of a sudden when people hear that horses bayonets comment during the debate, we see an increase in searches on Twitter. People going, what are people saying about this horses and bayonets comment? They search for horses and bayonets. They see all the tweets talking about it. And the Obama campaign, and also a lot of other political organizations, had a tweet, what we call a promoted tweet, which is essentially an ad or a tweet that's elevated to the top of the timeline. They are responding to that, which is, I forget what their exact message was, but it was kind of echoing what President Obama had said during the debate about horses and bayonets. So there was a lot of smart uses of understanding by the campaigns that it's about leveraging the conversation that's already happening, but it's something that I don't know if it was as conscious or campaign strategy has been rethought enough to respond to the fact that we're not in a place where we can always control the message or push, and we actually have to be leveraging the conversations, particularly with TV still owning probably 80+% of the media budget, and TV being a medium that's really mostly about push.
Yeah, I would just say, look, the internet giveth, the internet taketh away.
That's the quote of the conversation.
Memes are as old as the internet themselves, and I think we used to talk a lot about how technology was empowering everyone to be a broadcaster, and that certainly has happened. It also has empowered everyone to be a meme generator, and so I think that the days of color-coded message calendars that you stick strictly to and your one spokesperson issuing their one release a day, that's not the reality anymore. And you can certainly lose campaigns that way, but you don't win them that way.
It was really interesting to talk about the Big Bird trending online, but voters are smart. So not only was it a Big Bird, then they go in and they search PBS and Romney, and it sparks an interest for them to find more information about that candidate. So if your information if you don't have anything about, and sorry, Matt, to talk about tax returns, it only people just keep looking, and they're only going to find articles and negative things. So if you don't have a message that you can find on your website or in a YouTube video or something broader, it seems to just continue the meme type of conversation where you have the Big Bird moments kind of stand out, and these other horses and bayonets.
Well, it's a broader information access point. I mean, just to make the analogy, when you used to get an argument at a bar with your friends, people were just wrong and you couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
And today, the last time you were wrong and unable to prove it was never, because you all pull out your phones and say you're wrong and stuff like that, right? The idea that if you're going to do that at a bar with your friends, the idea you're not going to do that with presidential candidates, you're not going to ask your friends and figure out who's right and wrong, that's obviously the way the world is going to work, if that's the way you do it when you're at a bar with your friends having over a small argument.
No, that's the search, and that was kind of a point I was meant to make and I forgot, was that particularly again on the debate nights, but it is true any day of the week, the search insights and the sort of what was trending or not, especially when you kind of can see the granular reports that you can get as an advertiser, and you can get multiple keywords in. I mean, if anything, it validates faith in the intelligence of the American people. I mean, there's a temptation by sort of the defeated side, sort of, any defeated side, any election, to kind of, oh, the voters this or that. And in reality, I think the voters are really intelligent. If anything, our political system underestimates the degree to which they're intelligent, and the search trending results are, in part, proof of that. I mean, they were consistent. They put together the graphics after the debate nights, but it would be like, not just about the memes, but really getting into the issue. And maybe the pundits on television would be talking about, whatever the kind of 30-second soundbite of the debate was, but the search trends would be about the policies and the impact those policies would have on people's lives. And one of the things that I liked about your site, by the way, was that the policy pages were remarkably detailed, and there must have been, they were very well done, but they were always tied to the impact on a person. And that was, I think that when you're doing the bar room analogy about search, people would Google or Bing. I'm gonna get in trouble for that. For the results and what comes up. I mean, other than the first debate, the #1 search trend for each of the debates was in the top 5 was who won the debate. I mean, the search for truth there's that much faith in the search engine to find that truth, and you better be playing there.
It was interesting to see, sorry, not interrupt, but who won the debate, it wasn't just the candidate or the campaigns that used that trend, it was the news media. Like then you have like Politico and the New York Times looking at that and being like, well, what's going to drive traffic back to us too, so that we can verify things as news organizations. So it's interesting to see the media reaction to that as well. Sorry.
No, I think that's a good point, and I think we started talking a lot about Twitter, and I think to one of Sam's points here is remembering that sort of there is the platforms aren't as distinct as they used to be either between sort of intent-based engagement and sort of serendipity, right? And even things like I consume a lot of tweets via Facebook, right? These platforms are also interrelated, and I see things that my friends might be reading about that lead me to find more information via Google and vice versa, and it's not in the same way that I was sort of talking about sort of network of networks on media, sort of being a participant in this means sort of being comfortable with both sort of the power of Twitter is interesting because it really sort of integrates both serendipity and intent in a really interesting way between sort of what your natural home feed is versus what you might curate with your own lists versus what you might search for from a hashtag. And being able to think through the relationship between those things as a candidate and as a participant in the conversation, I think is just really complex. And I don't think complexity is not a vice, it's just hard. And the participant aspect of this, I think, is also really important. We were forced back in 08 or in 07 when we were first getting started on Facebook, pages didn't exist. And this forced us into sort of institutionalizing some behaviors that have been really good and have taught me a lot about how to engage effectively as an organization, which is these are mechanisms that were fundamentally designed as relationship mediums between individuals. And if you act like a person, you're going to have a better relationship with the people in your community than if you act removed and remote and passionless and like a bureaucracy. And that it forced us into that. The platform forced us to learn that in 08, and it's something that we tried to hold on to. And whenever I talk to other organizations about having personality and being opinionated and sort of being a person in a bar having a conversation is really important. And we lose sight of the fact because there's all this functionality built around supporting organizations and fan pages and likes and ads, and fundamentally these started out as relationship networks, and it's an important thing not to lose.
Yeah, so the important thing is, remember, you can't have a social relationship with an organization. You have to have it with people because that's who social is focusing on. One of the things that I think are really important here is the whole data side. We now have the potential to append to the voter file an email address, which then allows you to get a Twitter and a Facebook address, which allows you to pull in a clout score so you know how influential they are, which allows you to then potentially monitor what they're saying on social media, so you get some behavioral data, some opinion data. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be done at the individual level, potentially by integrating all these data points together. And then, of course, there's the sort of the macro data side of it in terms of what search is happening without necessarily knowing who's searching for it. You have that data over there that says this is sort of macro trends that are occurring, and how do we respond to those? So the question I want to address before we turn it over to audience questions is, to what extent did the presidential campaigns take the limit, go to the limit of this data integration? How much more could you have done? How much did you do? And if anybody can speak to what they might know about some of the congressional elections, that would be great as well. And then we'll open it up to audience questions.
I can start on the data. I mean, the integration of data and platforms was so much about what I was focused on during the cycle, and I think that in the conversation around this, we get lost a little bit between the difference between data aggregation and data integration, and we tend to drown in data. Both political campaigns and organizations and companies have more data than they know what to do with. And fundamentally, what most organizations are looking for is insight, not more data. And adding extra fields and adding more data to your database and how big is your database is a really, really pointless question. How big, how much data do you have? That has absolutely nothing to do with success as an organization. Understanding the relationship between a person's experience as a donor and a person's experience as a volunteer gives us the potential to help that person be a more effective advocate for the campaign, because we communicate with them in a way that is genuine and authentic and meaningful to the experience they're trying to have. And it's as much, I talk a lot about it. I use a phrase that I stole from Tim O'Reilly, and I try to give him credit for it, which is micro-listening, and the idea of listening to what people are asking for from you and making sure that you respond as if you heard it, right? We do a lot of like putting up suggestion boxes on the internet. They're just black holes. And we ask for people's feedback, and we want stories, and we want all this information, and then we don't hear anything. And trying to make sure that if someone tells us a story, when we are talking to a person, we believe, we spend a lot of effort and a lot of energy on the importance of people talking to other people. And through the field organization, we made over 125 million personal conversations between phones and doors, which is a lot of contact. And if we have we as an organization, one of our volunteers has a personal conversation with you at your door about your life, and then you come to our website, and if there's a way that you have told us enough about you, or that you're interested enough in letting us know who you are, I hope that we can continue the conversation that we started. Now, that's really, really hard. It sounds great, and it's sort of nice to talk about, and the theory of it makes a lot of sense, and I see everybody nodding. The problem is that the data sets are of unequal quality and are not connected. And so we spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how, as best we can get to in real time, make those data sets, make people's experience a unified experience, which means our job as the organization is to unify and integrate behind the scenes so that they don't have to do it. I think that focus on sort of the user experience of data and sort of the importance of insight is where this conversation should focus on, rather than on the sort of getting lost in sort of the technical details of moving data between different platforms. Because, we, just like all kinds of organizations, we have legacy tools, and we have, tools that we use for the field team and tools that we use online for donations, and then we have social platforms, and this data is not inherently integrated. It doesn't just, we don't just go into the office in the morning and flick on a bunch of lights and it's like everything magically matches and people play nicely together and everybody agrees on data formats. Like it just doesn't happen. It takes months and months and months, and we didn't finish this process. This is also another thing that I think is important, is any organization working on sort of improving and unifying their sort of experience of their platforms with the experience of their people this is a permanent project. This is not something that ever ends.
Yeah, I think one of the areas where I agree with everything that Michael just said. I think one of the areas where we did really well as a campaign had to do with the integration of the data behind our advertising, at least our digital advertising. Zach and his advertising team were very focused on, making sure we were targeting audiences and not platform specific and the rest. And I think the results that we generated out of that were very successful. To the degree that data integration is important, I couldn't agree with that more. And it is sort of an ongoing project for any national campaign or figure. One of the things that slightly concerns me, though, about data in politics, since the takeaway of this election one of the takeaways seems rightly to be that big data is important, is that as that trickles down into other aspects of politics and serves as an example to other efforts, both in government and the private sector, there's no playing field for that information. I think that the presidential campaigns, by virtue of their scrutiny, will act responsibly with the data. Maybe a campaign for mayor less so. But so that is one of the challenges, I think, that as we enter this era, the corporations, the big players in this space also have to act responsibly because of the legal liabilities and sort of the rules of the road. But you get a lot of exemptions as campaigns because you are engaging in political speech, and that's paramount. However, you don't want to have scenarios where people's information, somehow, becomes used for less than noble purposes after the campaign. I'm not suggesting that's the case here. It is not. But it is one of the challenges as we enter this big data era that I think we should be very mindful of as sort of a society. More campaign specific, sorry for that little aside, but as it relates to the Romney campaign, I think that the big takeaway is where data integration can be done quickly, it was done well, and in areas where it needed more time, I think it just proved that you need more time and that you should never stop building the data system as a national party, because you can't build it at the end and expect it to perform as well.
I think Michael made a really good point, and I could relate to it about, I think Matt said at the beginning that the two best campaigns when it came to data historically were the Bush-Cheney re-election in 2004 and the Obama 2012 campaign. And I came of age in digital in the Bush-Cheney 2004 campaign. And I'm glad he made that point, because I think it gets overlooked, in that what we were doing with data was very sophisticated.
Both re-elections, by the way.
Exactly,
right.
Which was
being the president is a very great advantage. It's
helpful
to be president.
Yeah, which was, I think, Matt's main point, and it's a great one, which is we knew what we needed to do. We had time to build that infrastructure. It was a lot clunkier in 2004, but it was also sophisticated. And I remember dealing with the databases, because we actually were trying to build almost a Facebook-like thing internally, allowing people to contact friends and neighbors and create parties and drive them offline, and all that had to be built from scratch. But I remember looking kind of at post-election as we were trying to determine what to do with the data, which is, imagine what Michael's going through right now, and having hundreds of data points in a voter file, or probably I don't remember the exact amount, but over 100 data points, and trying to determine how much of that would actually be useful going forward, and what formats to move things in so that we could use them. So this has been a challenge ongoing, and the reason I think it's an important point is I do think we can drown in data. We at Twitter are very excited about the insights we can get from data. We made use of them, we could see from Twitter this election cycle, in a couple ways. One was a Twindex, what we called the Twindex, which was an experiment of kind of tracking voter sentiment throughout the election and seeing if Twitter could be an indicator of where voters were moving in the election for President Obama and Mitt Romney. And it turns out that it was pretty good and pretty consistent with where also public polling was going. So Twitter did turn out to be a pretty good indicator of voter sentiment. We did studies that showed that people who follow particular candidates on Twitter and see their tweets are more likely to donate to that candidate, which is kind of similar. You see people are more likely to buy a product when they see the same thing from a brand. We did brand surveys for some of the candidates. Can't really talk about the results, but showed positive results in terms of people seeing tweets. So I think all that data is very exciting and useful, but I think we need to be a little bit careful. And I go back to this point that Michael made about drowning in data, because sometimes I would hear Unfortunately, the Romney campaign and Obama campaign were smart enough not to do this, but you hear from some campaigns that get so maniacally obsessed with being able to target individual voters on the internet that they're not going to put resources or efforts into platforms where they can't do that, or they don't have those insights. And sometimes they would even say that about Twitter, because we actually didn't allow the email append stuff. But when you have something, a platform like Twitter that's really become a public town square, now even a global town square, that is driving the conversation and making an impact on certainly the media narrative or on public opinion, you want to be careful, and not just Twitter, there are other places that you don't get so maniacally obsessed with targeting an individual message to an individual voter that you forget that the passion and personality matter, and that the broader narrative and the wisdom of the crowd matters as well.
Great. Do we have any? Yes. Speak up. Oh, we have a microphone for you.
Hi, my name is Susan Markham. I work at the National Democratic Institute, and I'm the director of women's political participation. And I was wondering from this end of the panel how men and women might encounter Twitter, Google, Facebook differently. And from the campaign part, did you work those mediums in different ways to reach men and women voters?
So, a couple of points to repeat the question, talking a little bit about engagement among women on platforms and outreach. A couple of things. I think there were key critical moments in this cycle in which obviously women, which is a huge demographic for the Democratic Party base, and other things were particularly in the spotlight. I think it started the conversation last year with the Planned Parenthood Susie G. Komen fight. It was really elevated with, among other things, the Todd Akin remarks and certain things. I think one of the ones that really sticks out in my mind is certainly the Ann Romney kind of criticism that occurred from Hillary Rosen on cable TV. The Romney campaign started a Facebook page for Ann Romney, got a lot of support, and really worked to build out that as their primary messenger to their target audience among women. The Michelle Obama page had been doing something similar for a while. On Election Day, Facebook ran a reminder to users to go out and vote. And one of the things we found when we looked at the data is that women were significantly more likely to click and share that they were active there. So I think that tends to be in line with women being a little bit more willing to share and do some of the things around this. But I think one of the things that we learned from this is I think to take a step back in that broader context is to drive that conversation is when these conversations, when things like Akin or other things happen, it isn't something that you're able to just pivot away and walk away from when it has the public's attention. And social media and these tools were critical in both bringing that attention, keeping in mind, and obviously allowing the campaigns to target off of those kind of issues and those kind of moments.
Yeah, I would say that as well. The Hillary Rosen comments, you brought up a good example. When moms drive the economy, I think that's what the Romney campaign bought, first of all, Hillary Rosen's name on search and ran search ads against it. And also, the neat thing about advertising online is that your ads are where voters are looking. So you can target that ad to a specific user based on browsing history, cookies. And you can have display ads. So we found, women voters are, they're the ones that are active on their mobile phones. They tend to search more actually than men, that we're seeing the trend increasing. And, so if they did a lot of things, if you're searching recipes or certain websites that would be women focused, they advertised off of. And I'm speaking to the Romney campaign because I'm more familiar with what they did on the Republican side and trying to target them through display advertising. And Zach and his team did a really good job of really digging into the data. And at Google, we don't have the ability to match exactly how old you are or if you're a woman or male. We can only do it an educated guess. So if you go home today and you look up in Google your ads preferences, we probably guess. Like my work computer thinks I'm a 60-year-old male because I tend to skew search news articles or like that. But my home computer thinks I'm a 20 to 35-year-old female because I'm, searching Pinterest or I'm searching Ann Taylor or whatever it happens to be. So that's how they're able to use our ads platform to target those women voters. And I think you did a pretty good job in terms of real-time response, and the Hillary Rosen comments are, and then the smaller level, the Todd Akin wasn't able to capitalize off of it. He tried, but the display advertising in it.
You had a question here, up front?
Hi, thanks. My name's Jordan, and I work with CrowdHall, which is a small tech startup that has some applications in the political space. So first off, I want to thank you guys for being here. This is like a political tech nerd dream team up here. So, and as a tech startup, we're constantly focusing on trying to find new or emerging waves of innovation or problems or opportunities that we can kind of adapt for, a few months or a few years in advance. So I know 2012 has just ended, but as you start to look at 2016, what are the biggest problems that you may be confronted, or some of the possible biggest areas of innovation that you think are going to really need to be either solved or tapped by your platforms and emerging platforms as political campaigns gear up?
I can start. I'll just mention one thing. So, Twitter has grown rapidly, as we talked about from the beginning. So, a stat that's pretty dramatic is that it took a little over 3 years for the first billion tweets to be sent through Twitter, and now 1 billion tweets are sent every 2.5 days and growing. This election night was actually one of the biggest moments we had in terms of the amount of tweets that were being sent, the velocity over a compacted period of time that were sent. In fact, the Obama tweet declaring victory was the most retweeted tweet of all time across Twitter globally. So that just kind of gives you a sense of the scale. That's a huge opportunity for anybody who's looking to reach audiences, whether that's a political candidate, a brand, or otherwise. It's a huge opportunity because those conversations are happening around every single issue and every single brand on different scales. It's also a huge challenge because how do you break through, how do you cut through and reach the audiences that you're looking to reach, engage them in the conversation, and move them to some kind of action. And that's where I think we've evolved over time at Twitter. I've been at Twitter a little over a year, and there's been a lot of progress in that area. This comes mostly through the promoted products platform, which is really a native advertising, which takes kind of the same format that you use organically, the tweet, and elevates it into the platform. There's also accounts and trends, but mostly the tweet. And we've introduced interest targets. So there's 350 plus interest targets, so you can actually target different audiences and target specific messages to those audiences. It's useful for those who are looking to market, again, whether that's a candidate or a brand, but the idea is that it should be useful for those who are using the platform as well. And not just in the advertising, but even in other areas of Twitter like Discover, which help people actually get to the content that they would be most interested in. So I think the big challenge was as a platform release like Twitter grows and you have volume like 1 billion tweets that are sent every 2.5 days, how as somebody who's looking to get a message out, or as a user who's looking to go there and have it discover more about their world and connect more to their world, how do they do that in a faster, more seamless way and as opposed to a cluttered way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep mine brief. I think it's about particularly getting Washington, whether that's government or politics, to understand that the baseline parts of our platforms are free. Anyone can start a Facebook page and be very successful, can have a Twitter account, can be on YouTube. But true technological success is about integrating technology. It's about building building on our platform, about figuring out how to take advantage of that, and then using advertisers to take what you've built or grow what you've built and push that message out. They don't make TV ads and then not pay money to air them. The idea that reach there, if it's important, also has to be budgeted for and paid for. And so, particularly having worked closely with, as the primary person who works for the government, for instance, here, for instance, the federal government's done a great job of taking advantage of these free parts. But in the technology part, the investment part, or for political campaigns, this isn't free. As Slaby will tell you, it wasn't cheap to do all of the things they did. It was worth it to make that investment. But when you think about something as an investment, it's a different mindset. You have to think about, when are we going to start investing? How are we going to put these resources behind it? How are we going to make it a priority? And does that take away from other things that may not work as much? The overriding thing I would say when I come out of this election, for instance, when it comes to paid media, is that the difference between putting 90% of your budget into television and 10% online doesn't matter that much to television. But if it's 80-20, the extra 10% online is a world of difference, and it doesn't hurt TV. It's not that much of a world of difference there. So it's about investment, and I think that the 2016 campaigns need to understand this as a lesson, is they're going to have to invest, because this wasn't magic. This was hard work from the Obama campaign, and it won't just happen overnight.
So we have time for one more question, and then we'll thank the panelists.
Hi, My name is Melissa Estock, and I work at NDI. And at any given moment, we're in a dozen places or more where there are elections happening, and there's an imbalance in the ability to use media. And I'm thinking of what you said earlier on, Mindy, about giving this technology gives power to the people. And we work in places where the traditional media is completely closed off to opposition voices and opposition parties. And it would be great to have all of you come with us to several places and see. I'm interested to know, you're light years ahead of where most political parties are who are struggling in these places. And if you were to go to these places and live in their context for a while and work with their techie team, what would be your advice to them if they're starting from scratch, as far as which platforms would you use and how far in advance would you work and that sort of thing?
So it's actually very interesting. My team is actually the reason I'm here, and that's Ginny Hunt or someone else. My team is actually in Kenya right now, working with our team there to do sort of apply the same things that we did here to where they can in Kenya, and then they'll go to South Africa and Ghana. So we look at this at a global thing. You know, free expression has long been a passion of Google. We are, as you know, that they cut internet service off in Syria yesterday, and we've worked with engineers from Twitter and Facebook to create this speak-to-tweet technology. So people there can now use their cell phone, call a phone number, leave a voicemail, and it will upload to Twitter using their Twitter account. And we did it in Egypt. So the thing that we are taking from what we've learned here is making that information accessible and finding ways to make it accessible to the population. Because in these new markets, everybody's using their phone. That's their primary source, and to make everything mobile friendly. So letting them know when to vote, where they can vote, and how to find information on the candidates through their mobile device is our biggest takeaway from this election, and how we can apply it there is giving them access to information easily through their phones. And when there is that overreaching government that can block internet access, how we find ways around that and still getting that information to them. And that's one of our goals, and we'll be doing that for the next year because our team is global.
Yeah, we have a global team that works on elections as well and in politics. But I would say, if I were to talk to someone who's starting from scratch, I would say it's a philosophy and an understanding. There's an apocryphal story that may or may not be true. I heard about one of the Middle East uprisings when communication had been cut. And the people who were getting the last tweets or Facebook posts with this information were running to rooftops of the city because the cell phones were out and shouting from rooftop to rooftop. You need to understand that information doesn't end with the last cell phone that receives it. It doesn't stop spreading with the last digital device that has that message. People can have these traditional networks of information that spread long before we existed, and those continue to exist and be reinforced. And so the more opportunities they have to have this information, they can then populate those existing networks. That's what we call really a multiplier, and we think is such an important thing. So information doesn't terminate with the last person who managed to get connectivity. It continues to spread outward as long as someone can receive it.
Go ahead.
I was just say very quickly, I think my answer to your question is actually very similar to the answer to the previous one, which is, in some ways they have an advantage, frankly, because similar to I think of East Asia's adoption of broadband, infrastructure, because they didn't have the legacy infrastructure of pre-broadband, they're able to rapidly deploy broadband infrastructure faster than Europe and North America. And I think that same analogy applies to the political system. Like, they have the advantage of being able to take the best of today, but without the encumbrances of previous infrastructure, even from the 2012 campaign, which is already, as amazing as it is from both campaigns, out of date if we were starting today. And so they have the ability to adopt it. I think, whether it's 2016 in the United States or a campaign in Kenya 2 months from now, look to the future, not the past. Look away from fading technologies and fading methods of communicating with people, as comfortable as they may be, in the living room, television or whatever, and look to the future. Participatory medium with free expression, and you'll win.
I think I was chuckling because I was having the same thing, that the last two questions are really intimately related of where to start and what's coming next is. If you're starting out, just don't try to do what we did, right? And the durable innovation from from what I see of what we did well is looking to 2016 is I have no idea what that election will look like, and neither does anybody up here. Although we can say some intelligent things, and one of
The person who
they're
wins the most
probably
votes
right,
will
and
win
I
the
can
election.
probably talk for a while. My point being is that it's sort of institutionalizing a culture that invests in technology as infrastructure, and that being sort of willing to engineer your way into solutions that work for the situation you're in. You're starting from scratch, understanding what success means for your organization at a very sort of values-based fundamental level, and then just starting. Don't wait until you have a perfect solution. Don't wait for the perfect technology. Don't wait for a magic platform. Just start talking. Just start using something, any of them. Yeah. And that momentum and the sort of culture of innovation and engagement, and then the momentum of doing it will get you somewhere good. I don't know where that will be, but it'll be good.
So let me say, first of all, the program has all of our Twitter handles, and you'll be able to see us talk about what we've been talking about, as well as some implementation of some of the ideas. Some of us actually kind of do, as well as talk about how to do. So I recommend that you do that and connect with us, and I'm sure we'll all continue the conversation that way. I want to thank the panel for fantastic insights and the questions from the audience. Really, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And you guys, relating back to the debates, how we were talking about it, I will say that a quarter of the way, halfway through your conversation, it was already on Twitter from this audience and the online audience deemed the political tech nerds dream panel. So the crowd has spoken. Thank you guys very much. And we'll transition to the next panel.